All the I don't even call
Or bad idea.
You're listening to the Breece Creator Podcast. I'm Lee Breece. If you're a nature person or just really want to know how to make money woodworking, then you might actually enjoy this episode. I started a job at a nursery this week, which is my second real job ever. Whether you love being outside or you can only live in air conditioning, amateur or expert, there's something in this episode just for you. I seriously just talk. So maybe you'll laugh. Anyway, let's get started. So, there's a lot of guys like me out there. All through high school, I had one job. I worked at a hardware store it was a summer job for about 2 months. There's a lot of guys out there who are like me and that they don't like having a boss. And so kind of like the first thing I want to talk about is how I got this job at a nursery, which is technically my second official job. I work at a radio station, but that's 100% volunteer. I go there, I have a show, I do some other things around the station, not a whole bunch. But the nursery job, there's this nursery down the road from me. In fact, I used to go to a school not very far from it in Indianapolis. And I drove by it every single day to school. This is like preschool and elementary school. And when I transferred schools, I started going to Brownsburg. I met a kid, him and his sister, who are twins, are both son and daughter of the president and CEO of this nursery company, which is actually a multi-million-dollar operation, which is really cool. And I needed the money. I needed a good job. And so I decided to start working at a nursery. And although it's a nursery, it's a landscape, crew / nursery. So they sell plants, trees, whatnot, but they also will come out and mulch your property or do whatever. So I kind of do a mix of both. I do some things in the nursery, which is mainly just watering, and then I also do some things out in the field. So I do mulching, planting, landscape, whatever. Just imagine it for yourself. All the different things that I could be doing. That's a unique thing. I like what I'm doing. I'm typically an outdoorsy guy. I like hands-on. I like being able to see, the result of my work. But it's just interesting getting back into the office politics, having to deal with coworkers and put up with a boss and do all of the paperwork and all the procedural things. And, after being there for a week now, I started on Monday. I'm doing half days because I still do woodworking for myself. After being there for a week, I've realized that no matter what it is that I do, whether it's woodworking, landscaping, desk job, whatever, the procedural stuff and the office politics and the whole dealing with income and pay and stuff like that is enough to make me say, I never want a job. I'm going to go to college. I'm going to study economics, do some maybe political science, maybe, I don't know yet. But I don't want a job. I want to start a company. I want to work for myself. I want to do maybe not woodworking, but just be a businessman. And you hear about all these people that are businessmen who, they have money here and money there and money everywhere, and they're invested in companies and funds and bonds, all this other crap that, these businessmen do. And, they don't really talk about that kind of stuff. And the other thing is, too, is that through all my years in high school, they never really ever talk about, people who want to pursue a career in entrepreneurship. They don't really encourage that. In fact, in schools nowadays, I think I talked about it before, is that there's an extreme push for STEM. Kids nowadays are very pressured to do something in the science, technology, engineering, mathematical fields, which actually, at my graduation, which, if you're like me, I really wasn't that big on high school. I hated high school, and at the same time, graduation, everybody graduates, at least for the most part. So I really didn't care about graduation either. But the salutatorian of our class, in her speech, made a political statement about how kids shouldn't feel pressured in doing the STEM things. And yeah, okay, I agree with that. But she's going to be a music major up at a school in Michigan on a full ride. So very happy for her. It was just interesting that, the salutatorian is kind of in that unique position that she's not going to be in a STEM career, and pursue something in music. So anyway, back to the whole job thing, and I've been, since I was a little kid, I've been brainstorming thousands of ways to try to make money on my own. And just with the Breece Woodworking thing, like if you follow the Breece Woodworking page on Instagram, which you can watch a live feed of when I record this podcast, which has evolved into I don't know when situation. But I do a little bit of everything. I've done jobs for people. I mow grass and do stuff like that. But that, as you get older, you want to actually develop a business, and that's what I hope to do, at least, either with woodworking and selling on Etsy, which I've kind of learned through a lot of the YouTube guys that we can't make money making things. Jimmy DeRista has been able to make a career out of it. Admire the hell out of the guy. But for me personally, I just, as much time as you put into something and as little as it's worth, especially the things you sell on Etsy, or you can sell on Etsy, which I'm learning that the smaller the thing you make, the better. There's not a whole lot of money there. I make paper. I have this paper tray for sale on my Etsy page, and I sell it for like $40. Okay. And typically people surprisingly have bought more than one at the same time. I don't know why people would need more than one paper tray, but I'm assuming that people want them for an office. I'm just surprised people actually buy them. They're actually fairly popular. You have to go check it out on our Etsy page, which is links on our website. Also check out our Instagram description for that link. But just because of the price range, the people who buy them are typically from California, and it costs about $40 to ship a box that's about 2 feet long, foot tall, approximately 15 pounds. It costs about $40 to ship it out to California, and that, if I sell 2 of them at a time, then that's a 50% profit margin. That's assuming that I get all of my materials out of the trash. And to me, it's like I spent 6 hours, 8 hours, 10 hours making these paper trays. And so if you divide that, that's like, what, $4 or $5 an hour? It's pathetic. So, how do you make money doing woodworking? And I think watching the online community and kind of see what other people are doing is really what's kind of made me brainstorm a lot better. And it seems to me that there's a couple big ways that people who want to do woodworking as a career make money. And it's not in the ways you think. Like I talked about, there's no way you can actually make things and make money. And so the 2 biggest things that I see people who do woodworking making money is plans. Matthias Wandel has done an excellent job in that he's designed all this machinery. He's a German-born engineer turned woodworker, has an engineering approach. He has found a way to make money by selling plans, which to me is the best gig you could ever have, because all you got to do is make the plan and people can just buy it off a website, which I think is brilliant. And then the second way is lumber. And of course, having lumber requires a sawmill, which many people do not possess, and it requires an incredible amount of startup costs. But if you look at a guy like Matt Cremona, okay, he started out with an Alaskan sawmill, and he still sold lumber. And ever since I've watched his video series on him making his sawmill online, I've just been incredibly inspired to say, yeah, people are, want trees cut down all the time. All these road crews are just tearing out trees, leaving them at the side of the road, or they're grinding them up. Or you see ads for Craigslist about people wanting to have trees taken down and stuff like that. And I'm like, there's serious money in this. You don't have to grow the trees yourself. You could just take trees that people are giving away, cut them up, mill up the lumber, and sell it. And I think that's a great way to make money. And one day, I don't know if I'm going to have the money to buy a wood miser, which are incredibly expensive, or just be like Matt Cremona and make a sawmill, like a bandsaw sawmill. I don't know. I can't remember in the videos if he priced how much it actually cost for him to make that sawmill. But that's something I'm definitely going to consider at some point. And that's a way to make money. The other thing is that if you look into the lumber side of it, there's so many incredible opportunities to make money doing that. When I was a kid, I remember driving by all the time around Indianapolis, especially on the west side, all these people that would have these acres and acres and acres and acres that were set aside. Either they're originally cornfield or maybe they were forests or whatever, but they grew trees there, about 12 by 12 apart. And there will be walnut trees, cypress, redwood, cedar, maple, all these trees that were grown specifically for lumber. And my dad always said that'd be a great retirement plan. Just plant about 40 walnut trees when you're in your 20s, and then by the time you retire, there's it's probably what, $30,000-$40,000 a tree. I have no idea what lumber prices are, but that seems like a pretty good thing to do. And in fact, even though I'm only 19, I'm still thinking about that every day. So every time I get the opportunity to plant a walnut tree, I do so. One of the things I love to do is plant trees. I don't know why. My dad hated trees, so we never had any trees on our property. So after he died, I spent all this time, and I still do, finding tree saplings, transplanting them, kind of like running my own nursery, sort of trying to plant all these trees. Now, here's the thing, though, is I don't plant just any tree. I don't plant the crab apple, the Bradford pear. I don't do any of that crap. When I plant trees, I think specifically about their value. And to me, a pear tree is not very valuable. The shade is not a valuable commodity to me. To me, potential lumber opportunities are what the commodity is. So I plant red oak. White oak is an incredibly slow-growing tree, so I haven't planted any white oaks. But I have bur oak. I have, which I think is a type of white oak. I wouldn't quote me on that. Look it up yourself. I plant walnut, red maple. So I do have some silver maple trees, although I know the wood's not that valuable. I also have some sugar maple trees, which my uncle has some sugar maple trees up on his property, which is north of Lebanon. He's got about 7 or 8 acres, but this is where I get primarily all of my saplings from, is his property. And that's Lebanon, Indiana, by the way. But he has a wide variety of trees, not all the kinds that I'm looking for, but he has a lot of pin oak. And pin oak, I don't know, is it very valuable as lumber or not. I do have pin oaks. I've mowed over a lot of them, but I do have some pin oaks growing. Silver maples kind of pop up everywhere, like I talked about. Not really a valuable wood source. So on my uncle's property, the sugar maples they've soaked up all of the nutrients around them in like a 20 to 30 foot span. So, I mean, if you plant a sugar maple tree, then you're just have to be leery that there's probably going to be nothing growing under it. Which to me, it's like if you wanted to grow for the sugar, or maybe, to make maple syrup, or maybe if you want to do you could do like a forest of maple trees. You never would have to worry about mowing the grass. I've actually talked to people who own about 10 to 11 acres, and I asked them, because there's a lot of people I know who are interested in trees. They know about you could plant trees and grow them, and sell them for money when you retire. And they said they've thought about doing that, but they just lease out the land to farmers because they think about the costs of maintaining these trees and the property taxes and stuff like that. And the mowing is something that comes up reoccurringly, is how much mowing they would have to do. And to me, like, if I'm planting a field like that of trees, I ain't going to be mowing. I'm going to find some other way to cover the ground so I don't have to mow all the freaking time. And even so, I mean, say you get like a Dixie chopper or something like that. I mean, say you were to mow, I mean, how long would it take to mow 10 acres? My property is about 1.5 acres, and if you count having to mow around the house, the shop, the garden, all the freaking trees, the fence line, the driveway, the mailbox, the street, the well, the septic tank cap, you count all that crap, it's about half an hour, hour and a half, not half an hour. So how does that translate to mowing a whole acre? And you got to think about how mowing around all these trees. The other thing I don't know either is, how does grass impact the growth of a sapling? Does it have any impact? Are there any nutrients that are being stolen? Water, was water retention, is the water retention too good? Not enough drainage? I don't know. But, since I've been working at the nursery, I've been really primarily working crew. I do half days. I work the first half of the week in the afternoon, second half of the week in the morning. And this week, my first week there, I worked in the nursery for both afternoons, and I did nothing but water plants. Which, is it's not a bad activity. I enjoyed it, but I want to work in the nursery to learn how to cultivate plants. And one of the things I learned about actually after working at the nursery and talking to some of the things that this nursery has a lot of history. It's been around for hundreds of years. They have acres and acres and acres of trees. In fact, they've sold off a lot of their land just because it wasn't valuable anymore. This place goes back so many years. You can go back through the records from the 50s and 60s and talk about when they put the interstate through. That's really what killed them. The business is booming. It's great, but the land, they initially had to sell half of their land because when they put I-65 up north that goes from Indianapolis to Chicago, that basically cut their property in half. And they also had some issues with deer and stuff like that, so they couldn't keep the property. But they used to have all these trees. That's primarily what they would do. But at the same time they were selling off all this land, they realized that at the same time, with the improving technology and whatnot, that it really wasn't worth their time to try to cultivate trees on their own and try to grow trees on their own than it was to just buy plants from someone else. Because that's the other thing too. They do landscaping, so they have landscaping plants too. So they would grow them and sell them themselves. They do all the dwarfing and the hormones and stuff like that, whatever it takes. And now they don't do any of that anymore. They just buy plants from somebody else and sell them on their property, or they use them in landscape jobs. So I guess there's not really a whole lot to learn in that sense. But I did talk to a guy on the crew. I worked with him actually yesterday, and he says that he's actually done the root hormone thing where you clip new growth off of a tree and then you stick it like an inch into this rooting hormone, and that part of the tree will actually develop roots. And he said it takes like a month for it to work. But what really got me is that he said he bought his rooting hormone at Walmart. He bought his rooting hormone at Walmart. That was the thing. I thought, if I was ever going to get into that, which I thought about, because not all trees, I don't know how all trees redevelop. Not all of them have the acorns or the seed pods or anything. So I want like tulip trees. Like, how do tulip trees reproduce? You just have to be around a tulip tree to find tulip tree saplings. Because, I've taken acorns and walnuts and started them actually from seed and grow them into saplings and then plant them in my yard. But other trees, I'm trying to think, how do I replenish them? But the other thing I did was I also joined the Arbor Day Foundation. Great cause. I paid my $10 for my 6-month membership, got my 10 free trees, planted them all. Not sure if they're living yet, just because it was kind of late in the year that they gave them to me. Typically in Indiana, we plant trees in any month that starts with an R. So it's like April, March, October, November, September, all that good stuff. They sent it like late May. It was kind of weird. But I did plant all 10 trees, and I think now I have like almost, of my acre and a half, there's about 15 to 20 saplings total. And I think in the last 4 years I've planted probably over 30 trees, because I've accidentally mowed over a lot. So then this time I actually made stakes and put those in the ground, and actually, so I don't mow over them. So I actually saved the tree, and other trees didn't survive the transplant. What I've kind of realized though is that with like walnut trees, or like if you plant, not even walnut trees, like I had a sycamore do this. If you plant a tree, like you transplant it, okay, and you lose like half the roots, or you transplant and it looks like it's dead, or even if you snap, like if you snap a twig off of a sapling, or maybe snap even the stem in half, and it's like it cracks, like it's dry, like it's dead, that doesn't mean it's dead. Because of what I've had, this has kind of been the surprise of the summer, is that I had 2 walnut tree saplings that I planted I thought were dead. And both grew back from the root and replenished like the whole stem, and the other stem was dead. I was like, whoa. And the same thing actually happened to my sycamore tree, but I didn't realize it till I pulled it out of the ground. Idiot I was. So I took this sycamore tree from my uncle's property. It was about 3 feet tall, and I brought it back. I transplanted it. It was dead, and I thought it was dead because all the leaves went off and stuff like that. It's like the middle of July, and I snapped the stem in half this past spring to see if it was dead, and it snapped in half. And this is before I realized the thing with the walnuts. And so I pulled it out of the ground, and it had like when I initially transplanted it, the majority of the roots snapped in half. I had probably about 3 inch of the taproot left, and this is like a 3 foot tall sapling. And I pulled it out of the ground, and it had developed all of these new roots, and I saw an itty bitty stem coming up out of the side of the sapling, and I was like, oh crap. I just, that probably killed it. But I put it back in the ground, hoping that it would survive. I don't think it did, but we'll find out, probably next spring. That's the other thing, too, I've realized, that if you plant trees when they're dormant, or even when they're not dormant, like if you plant a tree like in July when it's got leaves on it and all the leaves die, I think what happens is the tree will actually go dormant, and then it will be dormant for the rest of the season, and then the following season it will actually develop leaves and new growth. I think that's what's happening with the Arbor Day trees too, because the Arbor Day Foundation just sent them so late, and I planted them probably the first week of June, and they don't have. It's been about a month or so, and I've had nothing, no leaf action whatsoever, if you want to call it that. I've had no growth. I've had nothing. I can't tell that they're even alive. So I'm thinking that probably next spring they'll come back. The other thing, too, about transplanting plants, I know we've been talking about this the whole episode thus far, but there's lots to talk about with this, is that the saplings take a long time to get accustomed to the soil. And even I've had the saplings regrow leaves every season, but they haven't really grown. I've had about the saplings. The earliest ones are about from 3 or 4 years ago, and they're only about a foot tall, and they haven't grown at all. But I think maybe next year, because I was doing some reading online, and it said that you have to give trees about a year, 2 years to adapt to the new soil, and I think it's going to take these trees a little bit longer, mainly because my uncle's house is, it was built back in the 50s. It's originally built on on the property. It's a fairly old house, whereas my house is built in the 90s. It's in a subdivision, and it's what happened was they dug out the street first through the cornfield, and they pushed up all of this earth onto these to create the properties, and so that way all the water would drain down to the road and go in the sewer and stuff like that. But the thing is with that is that Indiana, at least this part of Indiana, has such clay soil underneath the topsoil, and that they buried all of the existing topsoil from that cornfield, and so now all we have is clay. I mean, I'm surprised grass even grows. I mean, typically, even sometimes when it's dry, the grass won't even grow that well. It'll just go dormant if it's that dry. And even having a garden, it's incredibly hard to grow anything. So like in my garden, every fall, or even all the time, I dump sawdust, leaves, paper shreddings, debris, topsoil from other things that I'm doing, edging, grass. I just dump whatever I can every year to kind of break up the clay, and hopefully over time it'll develop into topsoil, which is what I'm hoping. And because it's clay, nothing really grows that well. I've never had much success with peppers or tomatoes. Peppers don't really do well in the soil just because of how dry it is. They need to be watered constantly. Tomatoes are kind of the same thing. But what I'm thinking about doing with my garden is actually doing like a row or two of trees. And this is kind of what I want to learn at the nursery, because if you ever go to like a tree nursery, is they have the trees, and it looks like they're planted, but they're actually not. They're halfway in the soil. They're in the burlap bags with the mulch piled on top of them to keep them wet. And I thought about, how do they grow the trees from saplings, and how do they get them to grow, to be normal size? Is my issue with I would grow things like trees and plants in ramen cups, but they'd be like miniature versions. So I don't really understand why that happens. I don't understand how they grow these full-growth trees inside these burlap bags that are a ball that's like a foot in total diameter. To me, that's kind of frustrating to not, to have that problem, not be able to figure it out, especially when I'm working crew and I want to actually learn how to do stuff in the nursery. But oh well. But anyway, I want to plant these trees in rows in my garden, and I don't want them to actually develop roots into the garden. I just want them to actually have a growing medium, but I eventually want to be able to transplant them later. So I'm going to read and learn how to do that. But actually, there's a cemetery not far from me where they have cedar trees. And if you know anything about cedar trees, and this is Indiana, so it's northern red cedar. So it's not the white cedar like they have up in Michigan and other places. But if you know anything about cedar trees, that they grow wild. Saplings come up all over the place. They're always in your grass, and they're just crazy, especially if you don't take care of your grass. So if I go to the cemetery, I've been there once before. I've been there twice now. And I dig up like 14 to 20 saplings of cedar trees, and I'll take them back and I plant them in my yard. Majority of them died. 7 or 8 survived. But that's just me taking them and then transplanting them in the ground. But what I did this time is went back there, I dug them up, and then I brought them back, and then I planted them inside potting soil and ramen cups, which actually it's a 50-50 mix of potting soil and compost, because I get all of my potting soil out of the trash. I don't buy potting soil just because I'm a teenager and I'm extremely frugal, and as my friends and previous girlfriends call me, I'm just cheap. And I have no idea what potting soil costs, but it's one of those things where you can just drive by people's houses, and you go through the trash, and being a woodworker and as a maker in general, you can drive by and see things people are throwing out and just instantly imagine in your head all the different things that you can do with that thing that they're throwing out. And you'd be surprised how many people, when their potted plant dies, will just take the whole thing down to the curb and just leave it. Pot, soil, plant, sometimes not even dead. It's just like needs to be watered. And and all. And I have a couple neighbors that I've seen. I've drove by and just see this huge pot of potting soil just there. And so I'll bring it home and I'll use that. I have buckets and buckets of potting soil that I've gotten out of the trash. That's just kind of me. I'm kind of like the woodworker trash guy. Anyway, but I do a 50-50 compost mix when I plant these trees in pots, which I've actually read online is actually a very bad thing. Basically, you're not supposed to add anything to the soil. No fertilizer, no additives, and you're not supposed to use potting soil. You're supposed to just use regular soil, but I think that's for getting trees accustomed to the actual soil where they're going to grow. I don't know if it's necessarily it's not necessarily the fact they won't grow in that medium. It's just that it's getting your tree adapted to where you're actually going to grow it. So I'm hoping that these trees will recover in these pots that I put them in, or ramen cups, because again, cheap guys eat ramen. Cheap people in general just eat ramen. I'm sure that's when we get a lot in college. I'm going to eat so much ramen, I'll be a ramen head when I graduate. That's what I'll get, a degree in ramen. But anyway, but the thing is that, like, when I planted these cedar trees before, it was like, again, they would be green, like they existed, like they were alive, but they wouldn't grow at all. And then the following year, they developed some growth. And so I don't know if having them in pots will have any effect. But the other thing too about these trees is that some of them are really old and they've just been mowed over tons and tons of times, and other ones are actually saplings. And so that's another question that I have that I don't understand is, does mowing over a tree dwarf it? Like, if for example, I have weeds in my yard. Like, I have thistles. I hate them. You can't get rid of them. You have to spray them so many times before the actual plant dies. Because if you know anything about thistles, is that thistles, you see these multiple buds coming out of the ground, and they look like individual plants. But actually, when thistles are all one plant, it's all one plant. They all grow with each other. And so although you see all these multiple buds coming up, they're all one plant. But anyway, so they're in my grass, and you've seen how big thistles can get if you know anything about thistles. But like the more and more I mow over these thistles, like typically the leaves are spread out like 1 inch or 2 inches apart on the stem. But like the thistles after I mow over them a bunch of times actually develop leaves that are like 1 millimeter apart, and they'll be little itty bitty thistles. So I wonder if the same thing happens with trees. Like, that's my worry with these cedar trees, that they've been mowed over so many times that they're dwarfing and they won't actually grow or mount to trees. I don't know. That's something I'll have to learn about or Google, or I don't know. You see, I talk about all this stuff that I want to learn about, making things and engineering and horticulture and nursery stuff, and people know that about me, about how I'm just that kind of mind. But they ask me what my major is, and I say economics and political science. And they're like, "What are you thinking?" Or who are you? Why are you doing all this then? And my answer is that the difference between my generation and previous generations is that I have the internet, and my generation has the internet. And so I'm not saying there's a lot of things that are obsolete out there. There's just like, you can Google so much stuff now, and you can learn so much stuff online now that you don't necessarily need to have a degree or a major in something to know something. In 10 or 20 years, people go to apply for a job. You learned how to do something online. Can you put that on your resume? Just because you learned how to do it, by Googling or going to WikiHow or whatever, or eHow, is that something that you would consider putting on your resumes? Like, say that, I don't know, you had a degree in engineering, you were an engineer, then the company went broke, and so you couldn't find a job. Like back in the recession, I'm kind of actually talking about my uncle right here. He worked for GM, lost his job in the recession, wasn't able to find another job, so he started doing home repairs. And the way he taught himself how to do everything was online. He didn't know how to do any of it. He just Googled it all. Could he go back then and put on his resume that he did home repairs and he learned how to do it online? I mean, what is going to be the education background of people? What is going to be the expected level of knowledge of people going forward in the future? That's something I always think about, because there's all these things I've learned how to do online, but I don't know if there's things I can put on a resume. So for me, I've only had one real job before this. I worked at Ace. I had an internship at the radio station. That's the only things I could put on my resume. But I mean, I know woodworking, I know basic plumbing, I've done electrical work, I've programmed, I've made electrical stuff, I've done all this other crap. I've made videos, I do podcasting, I'm gonna do YouTube. In fact, this is a great entrance to that, because I just paid a bunch of money for a really nice camera. And hopefully I'm going to start a YouTube channel for Breece Woodworking, where I do woodworking things, vlog type stuff. But I'm already in the process of making some videos. You have to check that out. That'll be a Breece Woodworking on YouTube, which actually I actually do post this podcast on SoundCloud, iTunes, and YouTube. And it'll be that same channel that I post this podcast to, or hopefully I'll get into it, but we'll see. We'll just take it one day at a time. So as usual, I like to keep this podcast short. I don't, to me, the challenge is to get more information in a shorter amount of time than it is, like those other podcasts that talk for hours. This is just one way that I separate myself, by keeping my podcast to half an hour rather than making it an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours. And so far, people like that. So if you have any comments on the podcast, you can email that to breececreatorpodcast@gmail.com, or leave a comment on the podcast itself on SoundCloud, on YouTube, or on iTunes. In the outro of this podcast, I want to feature an artist who has released their music into the public domain. Artists who release their music into the public domain, I feel like, understand what art is and how it contributes to the world around it. So I'm going to end episode number 8 of the Breece Creator Podcast with Hook with Sloan by Bird Creek. Check the show notes on the website, breecewoodworking.wixsite.com/creatorpodcast, for all the information about this song and more. You can tweet at us on Twitter or follow us on Instagram. I'm Lee Breece. I'll see you next time on the Breece Creator Podcast.